question I've got for you. Who are you? Where are you from? And can you give me a brief bio on you?
Sure. So my name is Iman Music. I am the daughter of two refugees from Bosnia. So I was born and raised in Rogers Park, Chicago. I went to high school here. I went to college here. I'm a marketing student currently at Columbia College, and I'm also a writer and other things, but mainly a writer.
Okay. You said your parents are refugees from Bosnia.
Mm-hmm.
Did that play a huge part in your upbringing?
Oh, for sure. I think like the biggest role, probably. My parents are really like adamant about, they can't like erase their culture, so they're really adamant about it being a huge part of my life. So growing up, like, Bosnian people was all I was around, at least in my immediate family, and then Rogers Park was like the rest of the world. So yeah, I'd probably say it plays like the biggest role in who I am.
This next question I got for you, how did you begin writing as a profession, and may you walk me through that journey?
For sure. So I would probably say I started like publishing my writing in high school, and that was in the form of like writing for a couple like local magazines, and then I had always just kind of enjoyed writing. And I had a bunch of friends who were into music, into art, into just kind of like a whole creative realm, and that like business writing side wasn't their strength, and it somehow happened to be mine. And I figured that out through helping my friends write like Spotify bios or like press releases or email runoffs, and I just kind of like accidentally got involved in the music industry, and then that kind of opened up this like pathway into writing, and it kind of just happened accidentally, and I didn't realize I was writing until people started to ask me to write other things, and I was like, oh, I'm a writer. Like I remember there's this girl, she has a blog in Chicago, and she texted me and she was like, oh, you write, like you're a blog writer? And I'm like, what? No, I'm not. She's like, didn't you write before though? I'm like, yeah, I guess like just taking that label never really like came naturally to me. But then once I started Columbia College, which I originally went to Harold Washington, so I transferred over, that's when I kind of was like, oh, maybe I'm good at writing. And I kind of just like full force went into that, and just got into copywriting after hearing about that. And ever since then, it's just kind of like funneled into more.
Okay. You said that you transferred from Harold Washington to Columbia. Mm-hmm. Was there any particular reason why?
So I always tell people if I could, I wish I could have gotten my bachelor's at Harold Washington, but obviously it's a community college, so they stop you at your associates. Mm-hmm. So I kind of had to make a decision and figure out where I was going to go for like college. And Columbia just felt the most like non-restrictive, and they like also like really like feed into like kind of growing you as a creative, like a well-rounded creative, and that was better to me than like UIC or DePaul, which kind of felt like very like their own type of thing. So Columbia was kind of like where I could fit in without having to fit in, and I was a transfer student, so like I never really had to like get too much into like the social scene or anything, because at that point I was like 20 years old, I think, going into Columbia, so like I had already kind of like had my own community, so it was just about like picking the school that had the best resources for what I wanted to do, which at the moment was just like writing and marketing.
This next question I got for you, I know you've been running Residents of Rogers Park for a little while. Can you walk me through how that began and got to where it is today?
For sure. So like I mentioned, I was born and raised in this neighborhood, and I had a childhood friend growing up. Her name's Leah. We actually run the page together, and she had this idea back in like high school, and she brought it up to me, and we were like, yeah, we should do it, but then like, I don't know, it was high school and we never just like followed through with it until COVID 2020. She came back from college in Minnesota, and we were sitting at this park called Chippewa Park. It's just like a straight shot down a few blocks, and we were looking around, and there were like kids from like literally any ethnicity or like culture background you could think of, and they were all playing together. And like obviously it was a little like nerve-wracking just because like it was COVID and we were all like, oh my gosh, like scared. But at the end of the day, like they were so different in a time where like those were like really highlighted, like differences were really highlighted, and they were just enjoying themselves. And I was like, wait, why don't we like get back into the idea you had? And we met up the next day, came up with the name like instantly. I have a thing for alliterations, so I was like, Residents of Rogers Park. And then from there it just kind of, we started doing street interviews, and then like the project kept growing, so we started doing Zoom interviews. So yeah.
Okay. You said you've been doing street interviews and Zoom interviews. Which ones do you prefer?
I'd probably say, well, my social anxiety probably prefers the Zoom interviews, but I feel like the street interviews can come out a little more genuine, and like people will say like really vulnerable things, because I guess like you're not expecting to be open, and like once we establish that like comfortability, people are just like people want to share their story, and that's the same thing on Zoom usually, except Zoom kind of, I mean, like, it's through a screen,
exactly.
you know?
You got
so,
a screen in front of you.
yeah, you're missing that, like, emotional aspect, kind of, but, like, we've still almost cried on Zoom interviews, or, like, other people have almost cried, so, like, I feel like they're pretty equal in my book, but student interviews are definitely, like, a whole, like, more unique experience, I think.
Okay, I definitely get that. This next question I got for you, what does Rogers Park mean to you?
Oh, I'm trying, that's a hard question, but I would probably say, not to be corny, it probably means like everything to me, just because it established a lot of my like belief systems, and like probably in like a bad way too, it kind of sheltered me, because I thought like Chicago is a very diverse but segregated place, and Rogers Park is the one place where like you can't really see that segregation, even though there are like enclaves of different cultures like in their own respective areas, like people still mix and merge. So like even though Devon is mainly like Pakistani and Indian food, like you see everybody there. Even though Clark is mainly Mexican food, you see everybody there still. So it's like, I feel like that segregation that is in America and in Chicago wasn't in Rogers Park, and that definitely like helped me not have that segregation in my mind. You know, like obviously everybody still has those biases and all that kind of jazz, obviously, but Rogers Park kind of made it easier to get along with other people, and that kind of shaped me throughout my life. And it definitely took me through phases of like anger when I would go places that isn't Rogers Park, and I'm like, oh my god, like I've been fed a lie, like the world isn't this happy place, you know. But I kind of had to realize that like the world is this happy place in Rogers Park, so like it's a solace for me to come back here, and like it brings me that peace, and like it gives me what I want from the world and from what I want from society, even if I can't get it like outside of here.
So would you say Rogers Park is kind of your safe haven?
For sure, yeah. And I feel so like I always tell people when I hit like Western and Peterson, which is a pretty like, it's like right on the outskirts of the neighborhood, but it's like a really popular corner, and that's when I'm like, oh, I'm home. Like I just get super comfortable. I don't have to think about driving anymore, like where I'm at. Like I don't know, it just like, it's like people also can tell you're from here too sometimes, and like we're still nice to people who aren't from here, but like there's an understanding if you're from here, and everybody just kind of like minds their own business and like keeps to themselves, but like in a caring way too.
What would you say is the difference from someone who lives in Rogers Park as opposed from someone who's not from Rogers Park?
Oh, well, I feel like Rogers Park people can be way more open-minded. So I think that's that's kind of like a telltale sign, like, and you know too, like if you're dealing with somebody from Rogers Park, like 9 times out of 10 they're probably the most like open-minded and non-judgmental person you've met. And also like people in Rogers Park really care about each other. Like I'm not saying people in other places don't, but like here, like when we care about somebody, we like show it for them. Like, and there's no like, people are strangers, but like not really. Like if you're from Rogers Park, it's kind of like you're not a stranger to me just because I know like you live in my neighborhood, and somehow we have that connection. Like we have a bunch of interviewees, and like we too always say that like people who belong in Rogers Park kind of just end up here. So like that's like a common thread that like links everybody, I feel like.
This next question I've got for you, on a grander scale, what does Chicago mean to you?
I feel like Chicago makes me who I am in my endeavors, whether it's like personal endeavors or like work endeavors. Like that resilience that people from Chicago have like lives with me, and it kind of just like pushes me forward. So I feel like I use Chicago as like motivation almost, kind of, just because I know that it gets a certain rep and a certain like background from people from other places. So I feel like I have something to prove being from Chicago, like, and that just, to me, that's not like even about myself. That's about like shining light on the city that I'm from, and that I know have like gems of people that like don't get the same attention they would if they were from like LA or New York or whatever. So I feel like Chicago means the future to me in a way. Like it kind of like paints the future for me, but then it also like obviously shaped my past. So I feel like Chicago is just like my blueprint for the way I go about life. It's kind of weird to say about a city, but like the people around me, like the city itself, the landmarks, the everything, like kind of are like puzzle pieces, you know, and then they like help me figure out where to go from here, I guess, if that makes sense.
What would you say sets Chicago apart from other big cities like
Oh my God.
New York and LA?
It's so genuine. I feel like Chicago is like as authentic as it gets. Like there's definitely like animosity and like younger crowds and like the scene. Like that's a conversation that like I've had in multiple different communities in Chicago, but at the end of the day, like people in Chicago support each other as much as some people don't like to admit. People in Chicago definitely support each other, and like in like the realest way possible. Like people are authentic with each other. We hold people accountable as much as like we can, you know, obviously with certain circumstances, everything's different, but I think like people in Chicago just fend for themselves, but they also like keep their community in mind. Like it's a different experience, and I think people have to be understanding of that for sure. But I think it's just like the authenticity, because like when I think of, and I love New York, so maybe I won't mention New York, but when I think of like LA and like the complaints I've heard about LA, it's like that authenticity is what's missing. But in Chicago, like you have it all, and some people just can't handle
that genuine.
Yeah, that genuine like feedback, I guess.
This next question I got for you: what are some challenges that you face as a writer, both in general and in the music industry?
In general, I feel like I go through a lot of bouts with imposter syndrome, which I didn't realize that's what it was until like
100%
until like last year, and then that's like a whole new beast I'm like battling, because I guess like now that I'm aware of it more, it makes it harder, because like it's always been there. Like I've always been like, I'm not gonna write, I'm not gonna do that, like somebody else will, somebody who's more qualified or more talented or more creative. So I feel like my challenge is obviously just starting the thing I want to do, and then when I start something I'm like, oh, like I could have just started this, you know. So I feel like that's my biggest challenge, is like the anxiety of creating, just because like I don't know, I guess like with imposter syndrome, like you just don't place that importance on yourself, and like you place it on other people. So like I'm always like a supporter, and I'm like, I'll take other people to like the ends of their dreams, and then I'll be like, I'll get to mine later. Cause it's like, cause you feel good, you know, cause you're like, oh, I help other people, you know, like maybe that's what I'm supposed to do. But at the same time, like you not creating and not putting it out there, like is hurting yourself and other people, you know? So like, I guess it's just about like starting. In terms of the music industry, I guess one of the biggest things would be being a woman. That's always been really weird to navigate, I feel like. Originally when I got into like the music scene, I had a lot of guy friends, and like that comes with its own challenges, and like people will always question your agenda as a woman, and they won't really question it if you're a man. So I feel like I've had my credibility or like my intentions questioned a lot in the music industry, but I feel like that kind of goes away the deeper I get into it or the longer I go. Like that was kind of my issue like the first couple years, and now that I've kind of established those relationships and know how to like move around professionally, and I think just experience like and being a survivor of the Chicago scene for sure, I feel like that's just like kind of toughened me up. But I feel like that biggest thing there would just be being a woman. But in general, it's always just the imposter syndrome and the thinking like, I'll do it later, I'll do it later, I'll do it later, and then like being like, I need to just do this shit now.
Yeah, because you know later will never come.
Yeah, later will never come, man, because you'll just keep saying that. Sure.
You were talking about some of the challenges that you've had as a woman in the music industry. I very obviously cannot relate to that. Can you dive into that a little bit more?
Yeah, I feel like, so one, I feel like men, and obviously not every man, but like a lot of men in general will question like whether you listen to the music or not. Like I can't tell you how many times I've been like for example with Lucky. Lucky fans have been my biggest haters. Like you could be like, oh, like I really like Lucky, blah blah blah. They're like, oh, what song have you heard before? Have you heard this one? Did you know that he likes to eat blah 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 for breakfast? Like they're just like, I feel like men in music can be very, and sure, like I kind of get it, like they want to kind of hold on to their artists and whatever, but like they should have that same energy towards men too, you know? So there's always the question of like, are you doing this to like, you actually like the music, or do you want to just like be around rappers and artists? And it's like, that's definitely...
That shouldn't even be something that's questioned.
Yeah, for sure. It shouldn't be questioned at all. It definitely gets questioned a lot. And it was probably worse like when I was like 18, 19, just because like at 18, 19, everybody's just, you're nasty at 18, 19, you know what I mean? Like you just got out of high school, you think you're doing something, you're going to college, like, or doing whatever you're doing, like, so I think that was just like the biggest issue there. But in general, I think it's always just like also being one of the only women in the room sometimes. Like when I started writing for this publication, I was like 1 out of 2 girls, you know, so like that also is just like uncomfortable as fuck, because like just like some conversations are hard, you know, and like again, people just have their preconceived notions. Like if you're a man, you have to admit like you have things against women you don't even know, you know. So like that always plays into it. But at the end of the day, like I am a white woman in the music industry, so that's like a cushion within itself. So like it's not as bad of an experience that it can be, which I'm super aware of and trying to also navigate in the same sense. But still, being a woman at all in the music industry is like a hurdle for sure.
As a writer, what keeps you motivated?
Hearing that something I wrote did something for somebody, like whether it pissed them off or whether they liked it or whether it made them go listen to it. That's the best one, if it made them go listen to a song. Or like when I interview an artist and they're like, oh my God, I would have never thought about my music in that way. I'm like, oh my God, really? Like, let me write again. Like, I could keep writing about you. Like, I think it's like I use my writing as a way to like thank people. Like, I love writing about people and their accomplishments. So like, as much as I love copywriting, like of all kinds, I feel like my favorite writing is like interviews, or even if I'm like writing a bio or a press release and an artist is like, oh, I got a placement because of the press release. I'm like, whoa, like that's the whole point of what I do. I don't know, at the root of everything I do are like my friends in my community, and my community is anybody that like respects me, I guess. So like whenever I have a relationship with an artist and like my writing makes a difference for them, that I'm like, okay, I gotta do this again. Then I'm like, how can I offer this to another artist? And I feel like also just in general, if it makes, I feel like I kind of said this, but as long as it makes somebody feel something, I think that's the most important thing. Like we'll have people from the Rogers Park page like tell us like, oh, I read every story and like this one reminded me of my grandma and it made me cry, and I'm like, oh my God, like I gotta write another one, you know, I gotta figure out how to remind that person of their uncle and that person of their mom. Like so I think it's just like it keeps me motivated that I know it's connecting people to something. So then I'm like, oh, I want to keep doing this.
I definitely understand that, especially
sense.
when it comes to like tugging on the heartstrings, kind of,
yeah,
just because
dude.
That's something that's so hard to do.
For sure, yeah.
Especially through words.
It definitely makes you feel the way like, oh, I made you cry, you know, like, like I don't know, I'm sure that's how like artists feel when they write a song that like I can't imagine how Drake feels after like all of Take Care, you know, like and being able to evoke emotion in another human is like top tier. I feel like because that's what we're supposed to do anyway. Like all the other stuff is like complicated and frills and thrills, like. But the root of it all is like you're connecting with another person and you're making them feel something and realize something, and it's like, I guess that's what you're supposed to be doing. I feel
like honestly that's the deepest form of connection.
For sure. And to have that with somebody you're not even close to, like I feel like I've been written about maybe like a lot of my friends who don't do music, but like I feel like there's a, no shade to my friends who don't do music, but I feel like there's a deeper connection with those who do, especially if I've written about you, because I know you. Like, I probably played your music on repeat while I wrote about you for 4 hours. So, like, not only am I more connected to, like, you, but I'm more connected to, like, what you do, too, because I, like, contributed to it.
What's been your favorite experience as a writer?
I think my favorite experience has probably been seeing my writing, like, I guess I'm kind of repeating this, but again, seeing my writing connect people, like, a lot of the times most of my writing, like 80% of it is interviews, like with artists, especially like musicians. And I've seen like people gain new fans. I've seen people be like, oh, I used to never listen to blah, 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 and now I listen to them every day, and I'm gonna go to their show next week and this and that. So I feel like I don't wanna like pick a specific artist because I feel like I couldn't, but I feel like any time I've interviewed, oh, actually I have one. I interviewed Shawnee Dez. I don't know if you ever heard her music. She's awesome. And I was super nervous because I was kind of used to interviewing people I knew. But she was like one of the first few people I interviewed that I had like no connection to. And we like somehow we brought up astrology, and we just went on like a 15-minute tangent. And like I had never like met her before, I'd never met her before or anything. So it was like our first time talking, and we talked for like 40 minutes. And like it was the most comfortable experience I ever had, and like that was also one of the best pieces I ever wrote because it was such like a deep and like easy organic connection. So I feel like that when the writing is easy, and because writing is never easy, but when the writing is easy, I feel like those are my favorite experiences because it feels like I'm supposed to be doing it.
I feel like branching off into those conversations too is honestly like the best part of an interview.
For sure, it makes it better too because you get to know them more. You know?
They're able to like peel back their layers in a way that they really wouldn't around anyone else.
For sure, yeah, it's definitely an honor.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I feel like that's also like every time after I'm done interviewing an artist, I'm like, oh, that was an honor, because I just think, like, I don't want to be corny again, but I just feel like they're really important to our culture and our society, and like we don't think about it now, but like looking back, like every artist, like we talk about artists from all different decades, and they all have some type of impact that our friends, the people we know, the people we follow are gonna have like hundreds of years down the line. So it's like you get to be a part of something big just by talking to them.
It kind of feels like you're a part of history.
For sure, yeah. Oh yeah, yeah. It's an honor to mingle with a creative.
Oh yeah.
For sure.
This next question I've got for you, what's been your favorite moment during an interview?
So I think it was a Residents of Rogers Park interview we did. and we were kind of, I think it was a two-person interview, which we don't do super often just because it can be a little hard to like write a story about two people simultaneously, and Instagram limits your captions, you know, so that makes it even harder to like capture two people in one. But I think it was like one of our early on interviews, so like we were just kind of starting this off, and they just started listing people they knew, and it was like every single person I knew, and we started talking about these people that like I've never met these people, you know, but I automatically felt like I knew them just because they knew like 15 people I knew like really closely, and we spent like half the interview talking about people we knew. And that was just like one so Rogers Park to me, because obviously in Chicago everybody knows everybody. It's a huge city, but like everybody knows everybody. Like you're really only like two people removed. Sometimes it can be in a bad way, but this was the good way, because it was just like we knew so many people, and then like that connection automatically is like, oh, now we're just friends automatically because we knew all those people. And then we cried during that interview too, so I feel like that opened up like some like vulnerability there. So I feel like that was probably one of my favorite moments, just like finding that connecting string. But I'll also bring one more too, because we interviewed this one guy on the beach, and we like were scared to approach him just because he was like an older man on a walker, and like we didn't want to bother him, and like we didn't know if it would make sense to him also, because we have to explain the Instagram part. But we ended up talking to him, and he was like he had served in the Navy a long time ago, and he like was reciting his writing to us, and I think that was probably one of my favorite moments too, because it's like I just met you on the side of the street, you know, and like somehow I made you comfortable enough to like recite your like really vulnerable poetry with us. And that was also like, and he felt special. I think that's also, this is to a previous question, but what keeps me motivated is when I make people feel special too in my writing, because it's like the writing is fun for me too, obviously, but again, it's just kind of like an act of service to somebody else. And like if you feel special after something I've written, I'm like, okay, cool, I did what I had to do.
I noticed that you said writing is kind of like an act of service. Would you say that kind of has its like ups and downs?
Yeah, I feel like the biggest down would be like I'm not good at assessing my worth as like a personal thing sometimes, because sometimes, like I said, like I'm thinking of it as an act of service to somebody else, so I'm like, basically means I do a lot of free shit.
Oh yeah, I get that.
That I'm really bad at that, you know, like I love helping people, and sometimes like I'm like I don't need the money, you know, and there are other times where I'm like it would have been nice to have gotten paid for doing something, like whether it's a press release or whatever, but at the same time, like I think that only comes from pressure when I see online, like of other, and everybody should demand money for their work for sure, but for me sometimes adding that into it is like even more pressure. So I feel like it has its ups and its downs, but like at the root of everything, when you asked me if my parents being refugees like had to do with who I am, like it does, because it makes me like, my culture in the sense is very like giving, but like also them coming to Rogers Park and like the people who helped them along the way, like they didn't ask for money in return, and obviously that's like acts of care are different than writing, but in a way they're not. Like if my writing is like contributing to somebody's like career progressing, then like I'm serving my role as a community member, and like I think everybody has like something that they can lift in it, and like I definitely make money from it sometimes, but like I'd rather not, you know, I guess if that makes sense. I feel like I'm kind of losing track. It has its ups and downs, but I don't mind doing it, you know, so I feel like I ignore the downs for the ups, and I hope that one day I can like balance it out, that I'm able to make money from my writing in a, not from my community, or from like a business or something, so that then I can offer my services and whatever I do for free to the people that like I work with and I care about, if that makes sense.
I know you're talking about writing as a business. Would you say in the industry, like as a writer, it's kind of challenging to really just get your foot in the door and be like, hey, like this is something that I need like to pay the bills type shit? For
sure, yeah. People won't realize, I don't think some people realize how hard writing is, you know, like they think we just like whip it up, but it's like I go through the same process or a similar process that you go through as an artist. Like I too like want to rip up my shit and go crazy, and like I have that same experience you do, so it's like I feel like if more people understood what goes into it, especially with like editing, like my piece will start as like something really bare bones, and it doesn't become what it became like just because I felt like oh, inspired. Like, I had to work, I had to edit, I had to search shit, I had to like do a bunch of stuff to make it come together. So I feel like it's definitely hard to be like, hey, as a writer, I deserve money, just because people don't realize the extent of the process you're going through. So I feel like that's why it's important to like share that light, I guess, and like give writers an opportunity to say like, my work is hard. Like, and even if your work isn't hard, it's still your work and it deserves like money. But like, obviously any creative industry, it's hard to get your foot in the door, one, and two, it's hard once you're in the door to get paid for what you do. And that's just because people are always gonna like I guess I don't want to say abuse, but like abuse like creatives just because like it's like you think it's like, oh, people are just coming up with the ideas like out of thin air, but there's work that goes behind that. So I feel like as creative industries become more mainstream, I would hope that it becomes easier just because of like the knowledge of what's behind it. And I feel like that's already kind of the case in certain extents, or in certain industries, I guess. But it's really difficult, especially as a writer, I feel like.
Yeah, I definitely get that. Even like the editing process especially, dude, don't even get me started.
That's a whole monster itself, like getting started, okay, sure, like I can throw my ideas out on paper, but then like the process of putting them together and like grammar, like come on, it's a difficult process for sure, and people don't realize that. Like they'll think you'll just, I've had people be like, oh, could you just whip me up a press release really quick, I need it in like 30 minutes. I'm like, hold on, like, then you have to have like the idea process, like you have to get over the writer's block, which I'm sure everybody experiences like every time you write. So yeah, it's definitely a whole thing within itself that not a lot of people are, I guess, aware of.
On that topic of writer's block, would you say that like kind of forcing yourself to just get up and write kind of helps you get out of that rut?
I think that's the only, I've tried so hard, like I've Googled how to stop writer's block, I feel like in like 500 different ways, but the only way is to write. And I think also it makes it harder if you're a perfectionist. Like I'm the kind of person who's like, if I'm producing something, it has to be at the highest of my expectations, which is absolutely insane because I set really high expectations, and I think I do that as a way to like trick myself out, like, oh, well, like if I create something, it has to be like this perfect, and then I'm like, okay, now I'm not even gonna start because it can't be that perfect. So it's kind of like I use it as my excuse. But that's my advice to like anybody who ever has any writing block, just write something down. Like even if it's the worst sentence you've seen in your life, like just write it down, because then that'll spark another idea. And like once you get your fingers moving, then it'll just kind of happen. But that's the hardest part, is just getting up and doing it. So I would probably say, yeah. And that's something I'm working on too, for sure. Is just getting up and like writing it and not overthinking it. Because I'm also a planner. So like I'm like, oh, I want to map it out. I want to draw it out. I bought these like huge Post-it notes thinking that would like make it better, but like it doesn't matter what you write it on or how you do it, as long as you start, then it's like okay. But if you're just like wallowing around, then it like, it's not gonna happen until you just try.
I get that. On the same tip of advice, what advice would you give to aspiring and up-and-coming writers or journalists?
I would say write a lot alone, write a lot without expecting it to be published. I feel like what helped me a lot was doing like mock writing, I don't know how to call it, but like I would pretend I interviewed some artists, like, and I would just write like 2 intro paragraphs just as like practice to write, and like the only thing is like as a writer, like it's easy to write and it's easy to be a writer, but I think it's hard to get better as a writer unless you like actively put in the work to get better. Like I could churn out the same writing for the rest of my life at this quality and like I'd probably be okay,
Yeah.
But like that's not the point. Like you're supposed to keep expanding. So I feel like my biggest advice would be like write as much as possible, even if it's like journaling about your day and just saying like I had a really shitty day and leaving it. Like at least you wrote something. Like write one thing a day, because I don't even do that and I definitely should. Well, obviously like I write for work and stuff, but like write for yourself. And then I would also, another piece of advice, stop thinking that like somebody can do it better than you, or like stop thinking that you have to do it better than somebody else. Like anybody can be a writer, as crazy as that sounds, but anybody can be a writer, anybody can be good at it. So I feel like believing that like you have something to say is a big start, and just fighting that. If you suffer from imposter syndrome, just fighting that imposter syndrome and saying fuck it and like just do that shit, because honestly the more you do something the better you get at it. So yeah.
Sweet. I definitely needed that piece of advice.
Yes.
Is there anything else that you'd like to add on or talk about that I missed?
Dang, that fly right in my head. Not that I can think of. But if there's a question I should expand on, let me know.
You definitely got those questions
Okay.
like down pat.
Okay.
So,
Okay. I was nervous. Some of them weren't
No,
good.
trust me, all of those were like super in depth, especially like like questions about writing.
Okay. Good.
I feel like as a writer, like you kind of just have to navigate on your own.
Yes.
Like, you don't
Yeah.
have a
There's
lot of,
no like. Yeah. There's no like
like formula.
formula or anything, and like you can't Google shit. I remember the first time I heard what copywriting was. It was like on my way from work, like in 2018, and my friend was like, "Oh, not my friend, my coworker was like, oh, my brother's a copywriter," and I'm like, "What's that?" And he's like, he just like writes things for like different things. I'm like, what the hell does that mean? And like, I feel like not a lot of people can explain what copywriting is. So I guess that's also my piece of advice is like, I'm gonna add to that one. Talk to people who do what you want to do, as hard as that can be. And like, I know it's technically networking, and networking itself can be like really fake and like hard to navigate, but talk to people who do what you do, just because like having the vocabulary of like being able to say like I want to do this is like, I think, hard within itself. Because like I said, I was like Googling like what is copywriting, and like Google is so cryptic when it comes to that. For some reason I like could not get a grip on what was going on, and the only thing that helped me was talking to somebody who does it, so I feel like being not nervous to like ask people like how did you get there, or like how did you even get the job you have, because I feel like that's like the bridge, because like it's easy to Google and read and stuff, but like none of that's as accurate as somebody who's like in it.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
All right. As a sign off, can you tell people where to find you and your writing?
Yes, you can find me on Instagram and on Twitter. On Instagram, it's at Iman, IMAN 1467, and it's the same thing on Twitter, just with the 1 at the end.
Okay. And where can people find your writing?
I don't have a portfolio out yet.
Okay.
That's TBD. That's that imposter syndrome coming in. So I will probably have that up soon. So I guess if anything, just keep an eye out in my Instagram bio, because it should be there shortly.
Perfect. And I think that is the perfect note to end on.